All right, now we're here for part 3. Now these examples, we're on the back here. If you look at number 6, 7, and 8, and you look at what your x's are this time. Ooh, x is the angle measure. Angle measure, angle measure. Okay, so what happens, how do we use SOHCAHTOA, how do we use trigonometry, if your missing variable is now the angle and not a side? Well, first thing I'll do here is I'm going to write down SOHCAHTOA, again, just so I can easily match it up. Well, we're going to circle the angle. In this case, that's the x. Label the sides. Opposite length is 5. The hypotenuse is the blank. I'll just cross that out. And that means 12 is the adjacent, ADJ. Now, when we set up the equation, we have opposite adjacent. So, nope. Nope. Toa, oa, O-A, opposite adjacent. There we go. This is a tangent problem. The tangent of the angle measure, x degrees, equals the opposite divided by the adjacent. Now there's a couple things here. This is the one time we're not going to cross multiply because the numbers are already on the other side. Like, this is good. Our goal is to get x by itself, and if the numbers are already on the other side, that's a great start. The problem is that this x is not x. It's the tangent of x. We need to break that apart somehow. We need to break that up. Now, we've learned some methods. Again, on the side here, I'm going to go back to some things you're more familiar with. So if I said 3 times x is 18, how do you undo multiplication? You divide. X is equal to 6. If you have x squared is equal to 25, how do you undo a square root? How do you undo a square? You take the square root of both sides. X is equal to 5. What you're doing here is what we call an inverse. Division and multiplication are inverse operations. They undo each other. Squares and square roots undo each other. Those are inverses. So the way that we undo the tangent of x is we have to take the inverse tangent of x. Now, what does that look like? Well, on your calculator, whether it's graphing or scientific, if you look at the tangent button, right above that in blue, it says tan -1. Tan -1. It looks like an exponent, that -1. But what that actually stands for is inverse tangent. We also have an inverse cosine, and we also have an inverse sine. So what we're going to do, we're not dividing both sides by tangent of x. We are going to take the inverse tangent of both sides. We take the inverse tangent of the left side, and then we take the inverse tangent of the right side. And just like with any equation, as long as you do it to both sides, you're okay. As long as I do this to both sides. Now, what happens? The inverse tangent of the tangent, they undo each other. So that whole thing just becomes x. They wipe each other out. Just like 3 divided by 3 wipes itself out. Just like a square root of a square wipes itself out. So this is just x equals the inverse tangent of 5/12. And now it's a calculator problem. So I'm going to type second tan. That's how I get the blue here, is I go second tangent, inverse tangent, 5 divided by 12. And that's 22.6. And the 22.6, don't forget, this is an angle measure. X is an angle measure, so it's 22.6 degrees. That's it. You're done. So this is actually the quickest one to solve because if your variable is the angle, you're always going to take the inverse tangent or sine or cosine of whatever your fraction is. So let's look at number 7. Okay, find x, circle the angle, label, opposite, hypotenuse. The adjacent is the blank. cross that out. So which ratio uses opposite hypotenuse? So that's a sine. So we got sine x degrees equals the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. There's your ratio. Now again, we're not cross multiplying. The numbers are already on the other side. All we're going to do is break apart the sine from the x. So to break that apart, we have to do the inverse sine of both sides. So that sin -1 is the inverse sine. That's what it means. On the left side, that just crosses itself out. It undoes itself. We get x equals the inverse sine of 8/12. And now it's a calculator problem. Inverse sine, 8 divided by 12, 41.8. And again, this is angle measure. So x equals 41.8 degrees. And then the last one here, number 8, find x. Circle the angle. There's the opposite, that's blank. Here's the hypotenuse, here's the adjacent. Now, adjacent hypotenuse, cosine. So the cosine x degrees equals 15/17. And what's going to happen after you do a few of these, like I said, you realize right away how this is going to work. Well, I know I'm going to take the inverse cosine of both sides, which is going to leave me with x. This will be the inverse cosine 15/17. Now I go to the calculator. And we get 28 point. Now that says 0, but the next digit is a 7, so I'm going to round that up to a 1. So 28.1 degrees. And that is the end of part 3.